My name is David Roberts, for those who don't know me. This is our third message of a series on mental health and spirituality. The title of this series is The Search for Wholeness. The first week was a message called Finding Hope. The second message was given by Steggals, who's here with me. It's called Finding Help. And this message, which is very different, as you can tell, is entitled Finding Healing and Community. So we're going to try something new this week that we've never done before here at Christ Church. This is going to be more of a conversation. I have Peter with me, I also have Lisa Hamilton, and myself. And so this is going to be a new format. It's going to be like a conversation. We'll have a series of questions that I'll be giving to Pete and Lisa. I'll be the interviewer and facilitator, and then I also will share some of my own thoughts as well. And then you all can participate in this conversation by sending questions via a QR code that's now on the screen. So if you have any questions regarding mental health in a church community, you can send that question to, it'll go to Nate, and he will pass them on to me. So if you see me on my cell phone, I'm not sending texts. I'm not trying to read the news or anything like that. I'll be looking at some questions to add to this conversation. So I think that's pretty much how the format will go. And really glad to be able to do this with you all. Really thankful for the opportunity to talk about spirituality and mental health, and to have two people here with me that have great experience working with people, and specifically with mental health. So we're going to start out by each person introducing themselves and sharing a little bit about your experience in mental health. I'll start out since I already have the mic. My name's Dave Roberts, and I studied psychology and counseling. And for a number of years, about 20 years, I worked in the areas of criminal justice. I worked with people coming out of addictions to drugs and alcohol. I worked with youth and families. And I spent 8 years living in Argentina. And in Argentina, for most of the time, I worked with recovering drug addicts through a church rehabilitation program. So that's a little bit of my experience. I'm going to pass the mic, or actually you have a mic. Lisa, if you would.
I'll go next.
Yes.
So I'm Lisa Hamilton. I'm here part of Christ Church for a long time. My professional training is elementary school teaching. So I became a teacher and was a teacher for a few years until our own kids were born. But really across the years, I've discovered that my vocation is people. And actually the best way to help children is to help children's parents, who are the biggest influence on children. And so I've found across the years different tools that have helped me to help people. Because really what I think we all need is to find the tools to get closer to ourselves, which helps us to get closer to God. So there are lots of different tools, and part of what we're talking about in these conversations is what tools do I need? What do I need to help me take that next step in my growth? So I've done lots of groups and lots of individual sessions with people, always trying to help individuals find their next step of faith.
Thank you, Lisa.
Good morning. My name is Pete Steggals. So I spoke last week about the fact that I suffered from some mental health problems when I was much younger. And I did heal from those problems, but it gave me a great interest in mental health issues. I ended up working in forensic psychology in the United Kingdom, working in a male prison and in a female prison, where we encountered a great range of mental health issues. The main one being what people call self-harm or non-suicidal self-injury. So where people are cutting themselves, burning themselves, harming themselves in all sorts of different ways. So we would have to provide support for self-harming and suicidal prisoners. After that, I came out of the prison service and I studied mental health and became what's called a medical sociologist. So I'm a sociologist who specializes in medicine, but specifically in mental health and illness. And yeah, that's my background.
All right, thanks, Pete. Well, let's get into the questions that we have for today. The first question is, and either one of you can answer, whoever would like to first. The first question is, what does a community look like that is a safe place for people and families dealing with mental health issues?
I think this is a really, really massively important question, and there's a lot of things that we can do as a community. It's really important that we do think about this, because one of the first places that people go when they are suffering from some kind of mental distress or disorder is they go to their church, they go to their faith community. So it's really important that we try as a community to become more welcoming and more supporting. I think one of the main things that we can do is provide hospitality. We can welcome those people in, and we can welcome them in as the whole person that they are, not just welcoming in that part of them that we find acceptable or interesting. So I think this can work in a couple of different ways. You can basically say, yes, we welcome this person, but we don't really want to deal with these issues. We don't want to deal with these problems. We would rather deal with the part of that person that is not inconvenient to us. The other way it can happen is that you say, yes, we welcome this person in. Oh, and the main thing about this person is that they have this issue. So you end up reducing the person to their problem and defining them through their problem. And a lot of the time that goes with us also sort of jumping in and trying to solve that problem for them. So I think what we need to do is to see them and accept them as the whole person that they are, welcome them as the whole person that they are, and understand that they are a loved and cherished child of God, somebody who carries the image and likeness of God, and that when we look into their eyes, we're looking into the eyes of a person who God loves. So I think that's one of several things that we can do that's really, really important for welcoming people in and making them feel that they're not other, that they're not monstrous because of the problem that they have. They are lovable, they are loved, they're welcome, and they're accepted.
Thanks, Pete. That's really good. Appreciate that.
I'll just piggyback on what Pete said. I think we as a community need to do our own personal work so that we're able to be comfortable and welcoming and open to any kind of person. If somebody makes me uncomfortable, it's not the person's problem, it's my problem. I need to grow, to become comfortable with whatever's going on. I really dream of our community being a place, being a community that is responsive to other people's deep needs. Maybe not even needs that they feel comfortable talking about. Mental health issues are things that we don't really want to talk about, that we feel ashamed of, or that we feel because of the world around us, we feel are bad parts of us. And actually, mental health issues are a gift to the community because they help us all grow into more complete human beings. So Christ Church has, well, I won't go into that because that's another question, but we have groups, and being a part of a group is a risk, but it's also a great gift.
Thank you, Lisa. As I listened to both of you speak, a couple of words that came to mind were accepting and welcoming, compassionate, and another thing that I just think about as I heard both of you speak is that a safe community for people with mental health brings hope. And what both of you spoke about are ways of looking at people that are hopeful, that they feel accepted, and they also there's hope that there can be healing here. This isn't a place that where I'm going to be, that I have to be there's always a possibility of being hurt, but there's hope for healing to happen, that this is a place that sees me as a person, and that makes me want to be a part of it, which is the idea that we want here, and obviously we would hope that all churches would offer that. Let's look at the next question. So this question is kind of the second part of the first question. We talked about what does a safe community look like for people with mental health issues. Second question is, what is the greatest or the biggest mistake that a church community could make in regard to people struggling with mental health?
Maybe we send the message sometimes that you're welcome after you get well. Just go get well. Just go fix whatever the problem. I can send you to somebody. I can I can let you go do that, and then you're welcome. Go fix that problem, and then you're welcome. I think that's a mistake. Or to show my own discomfort. If I am uncomfortable, it's noticed. I cannot hide what I really feel inside very easily. Some people can do it better than others. But if I'm uncomfortable, the best thing is to recognize that and acknowledge it and say, I'm working on this. I want to be available for you. I want to help you with this, or know what to say, but I don't know what to say. Kind of get the elephant out of the room idea.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. And really, the answer to this question is the flip side of the answers to the previous question. So if the thing that we can do is to welcome the whole person and welcome them in such a way that preserves the dignity of being human, then the thing that we can do that is not ideal is to do the opposite of that, to maybe welcome them, but to do so in such a way that doesn't preserve that dignity. And it's hard to express how absolutely important this is. For a lot of people struggling with mental health problems, it's intensely isolating. It makes you feel incredibly lonely. To have somewhere that you can go to, where you are welcomed, where you are accepted, where you can feel some degree of belonging, is in and of itself a huge thing. And of course, there can be several different communities. It can be your family life, it can be your friends, it can be your work, but it can be a church community as well. So I'll just sort of answer the question by giving you the opposite version. I spoke last week about a young woman called Jess who struggled with depression and anxiety and ended up cutting herself as a way of managing her problems. One of the things that happened to her is eventually she realized that she needed to go and talk to someone. And she was at university, so she decided to go and talk to the university chaplain. And she was terrified because she felt she would walk in there, tell this guy what she was doing, and he would look at her as if she were a monster. He would look at her and judge her and say, what are you doing with God's gift? You know, God has given you this gift of life, this gift of your body, and you're cutting it. He didn't do that. He listened to her. He accepted her. And he dealt with her in such a way that she was able to walk out of that room, having shared her terrible secret, and still feel that she had dignity. That dignity of being human, that she was still accepted as a child of God. And that was a turning point for her. It was so important.
Thank you, Pete. I think that's a really great point, that if somebody feels like they're going to be condemned, or actually is condemned in the process of taking a risk and sharing something deeply personal, that's incredibly harmful and unsafe, obviously. Another thing I'm thinking about, if I can add, is something we've talked about, Lisa, us with the pastoral team and with others, is just respecting when people do share something deeply personal, letting that be confidential, not sharing that with the community, but letting that be something that's kept private. Then we respect that person and what they're sharing and realize the risk and even the gift that it is for them to share something with us. In an unsafe community, there's gossip and there's rumors, and that's incredibly damaging, and it leads to people, no one's going to stay in that community. And so that's something at Christ Church we're talking about, and we want to make sure we're doing a good job with that because it's so important. So important. Well, the next question, I think is one of my favorite questions from this list, and that brings a question that really talks about hope. The question is, where do you see God at work, bringing healing and wholeness for mental health? Lisa, you have the microphone. I don't know if you.
Well, I'll just say a couple of things, and then one is God's name for Jesus was Emmanuel, which means God with us. What we need is to know that we're not alone, just like we've been singing. We need to know that we're not alone. And God ultimately is always with us, is the only one that's always with us. But the name for Jesus is God is salvation. And I just think it's like written into his name, you know? This is what God's purpose is to be with us and to save us from what's inside, from our fears and our insecurities and our mental health issues and our fears and insecurities about our mental health issues, you know, all of that. So I think that's a huge one. I also think that we say at Christ Church, God's promises are more real than our circumstances. I'll just say that again. God's promises are more real than our circumstances. So when Jesus says, you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free, that's true. And the truth about me is everything. And that truth, dealing with that truth and being able to speak that truth is really so freeing. Of course, in a community that's a safe community, not just sharing it with anybody who might use that information to damage me. And that's part of our work as a community, is to build that safety. Then
That's
I would
great point.
Yeah, I'll pass it on to Pete.
Oh. You didn't have to pass it on. You can keep going. I love what you were sharing.
After Pete.
Yeah,
Please do. Please do.
I think this is something that's really important to get right. A lot of people who are experiencing challenging thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can feel broken, can feel fractured and fragmented. But we read in John's Gospel that Jesus promised us life, not just life, but a fullness of life, a wholeness of life. And so there seems to be a tension between brokenness and wholeness. And it leads to this idea that if you have that wholeness, then you shouldn't experience brokenness, that those two things should contradict each other. Now, the reality is that there's good evidence to show that people who are committed to their faith, who have a sort of spiritual faith, are protected to a degree from mental illness. People who have that kind of faith are less likely to become mentally ill. People who are in recovery from severe mental illness often will discover an interest in spirituality, and that can be the beginning of their process of recovery and transformation. A mental health nurse once said to me that religion was the dirty little secret of psychiatry, because they didn't want to admit that this is something that they see time and time again. And there was a really interesting study from Johns Hopkins University in the US that showed that people who experienced an encounter with God also experienced a transformation in their mental health. So this idea of wholeness certainly impacts our mental health, but it doesn't guarantee you that you will be, mentally healthy, perfect, you'll live in a bubble, you'll never have a problem. So I think we need to rethink what that wholeness means. Because, we've talked in the last couple of weeks about 2 Corinthians, where Paul speaks about having a thorn in the flesh. He prays 3 times to have it removed, but God basically says, no, my grace is sufficient. So it seems to me that wholeness and fullness of life is a wholeness and fullness of human life. It's not like we're angels, purely spiritual beings. We have human bodies and human lives to live, and they come with difficulties, struggles, and challenges. So it seems to me that one of the things that God does, or one of the ways in which God is with us during these problems, is that God is the bigger picture. Our struggles and our problems unfold within this much bigger picture and this much bigger story that the Bible tells. A love story about the love from a perfect, infinite God for an imperfect and finite creation that we're part of. And so we are part of that picture, and that's why Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. We're part of that picture. Our troubles, our problems, our lives unfold within that bigger picture, and it means that we can put them into perspective. It helps us to live with them as Paul had to live with the thorn in the flesh. And just to finish up, the reason I think this is really important is because healing is possible, it does happen. But it's also true that some people live with ongoing chronic mental health issues and problems. They are not going to have a complete healing, medically speaking. But they can find ways to manage their problems and understand the struggles of their life within this bigger picture, and therefore actually find wholeness and fullness in the same way that St. Paul must have found it, despite the fact that the thorn in his flesh was not lifted.
That's great, Pete. That reminds me of a really great book by Henry Nouwen, a Christian author, called The Wounded Healer. And the idea is that Jesus is a healer that continues to have scars in his hands and in his side and in his feet. And that sometimes for us, following Jesus means that our scars, our weaknesses, can actually be a part of helping others find healing. And that's what I hear you saying, Pete, that we still have scars, but we don't have to have shame of those scars. They're absolutely beautiful when we have healing, and those scars can be used by God to bring healing to others. And so instead of having shame, we can actually see the glory of God in those scars.
That's amazing. I just keep thinking about things that Jesus said, words that Jesus said. And one of my favorite verses is in Matthew, in the Message. If you've never read the Bible in the Message version, it's very, very excellent because it brings it right into your heart. It brings it right into your our way of thinking in this day and age. But here's what Jesus says. I'd like to read that. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Isn't that a wonderful promise? Isn't that just exactly what Emmanuel, God with us, wants to do? That's it. Learning to live our life with him. And I think that's what Pete was referring to. That's spirituality, is putting our hope and our help outside ourselves so that we can recover, so that we can put the pieces back together with help, We always need help. We're designed for that.
That's great. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing that. I have a question here that came on my cell phone, if I can unlock my phone. Well, there might be a couple questions, but I'd like to take the opportunity to respond to one of these. So either one of you could answer this question. The question is, it's in Spanish, so I'll just translate it into English. That would probably fit better. If I have depression and the people around me tell me that I have to be happy in the Lord, but I don't find it. I don't find that happiness. What do I do?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. If I have depression and the people around me tell me that I must be happy in the Lord, but I don't find that happiness, what do I do?
Be yourself first. Stand your ground maybe and say, I don't find that happiness right now. Maybe I'm not going to always be that way, but right now, this is me. And pray. I pray often for myself and for others. Lord, reveal me to myself, because God knows me more than I know myself sometimes. And there are parts or reasons maybe that I'm not happy, that I am depressed, that I don't even know about. But I've got to find that first so that happiness can come out. Happiness is not a superficial thing. We can pretend, but if we're really going to be happy, it has to come from inside. And so what are the obstacles to that? What's going on inside that keeps me from really connecting with happiness? That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's good.
It reminds me a little bit of Job, when Job basically is struggling with what's happened to him, and he has all these friends who are telling him, well, it's because of this, it's because of that. And he can't see any truth in what they're saying. So there's a sort of a similar dynamic here, where basically this person's friends are saying, no, you should be happy. And so you say, but I'm not happy. And that's where you start to think, maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe there's something that's monstrous. Maybe there's something about me that God can't accept. God can bring happiness to all of these other people, but not to me. Why is God rejecting me? I think this is partly where bringing in a bigger picture helps. Because if you're depressed, then your world becomes depressed. And so if the picture of your life and world is just black with depression, then that's all you have. But if there is this bigger picture, this bigger story around it, then it can be a very large picture with all sorts of different colors and details. And the blackness that made up your picture is still there. That's not gone away. And that's still your bit of the picture. But it's not all black now. There's so much more going on around it. And so you can put your feelings into perspective a little bit. And hopefully, if you can do that, then you can not fall into despair. You don't compound depression with despair or with panic or with fear. You can say, this is something that happens to people. This is not nice, but it's okay. I can handle this. The only other thing I would say is, because this is what I do. Last week I told a story of healing, and I was most certainly healed. But to be clear, I still periodically get depressed. It visits me once every 2 years, and I get it for about 4 or 5 months. And for those 4 or 5 months, as I said last week, all of the color drains out of the world. But what I look for is the one thing that is immune to that. And for me, and I can't speak for this person, but for me, that's always kindness. You look for kindness, you see kindness, and it's like there's a black and white movie, but it has this one little bit of bright pink or orange or something like that in the middle of it. And that's kindness. That's something that doesn't lose that color. It's almost like a gift forcing its way into the world. And so I can see that, and it gives me hope. It gives me confidence, because I know that there is a route out. There's a route to reconnect to that bigger picture that's God's picture and God's story. But it takes time. And that's one of the things with depression, is it has its own timetable. And you just have to basically have the confidence to be able to go through that. And don't, panic isn't the right word, but don't panic. Don't fall into despair. Don't worry that this is the end of the world for you. You will find a way out. You will find a way through.
Yeah, you haven't failed. Thank you both. There's a lot to say on that, and on so many of these topics, and I have so many thoughts in my mind. At the end, we'll let you know about another opportunity if you're interested in hearing more and asking more questions. But for the sake of time, I do want to. There's one other question I wanted to ask, and this is a hard question, but I think I want to ask it regardless. The question is, what are healthy ways to persuade someone to not end his or her life? And it says here, a comment, using guilt, threats, spiritual fear, tactics, etc. can be natural, but probably not healthy. And I would agree that is never healthy, never advisable in a church setting or in a mental health setting. And it's a tough question, but even just some thoughts. What could be some healthy ways to help somebody?
I think first thing that comes to my mind is that suicide is a permanent answer to a temporary problem. A person feels what Pete was mentioning, kind of despair, and feels like there's absolutely no way out. But that is not true. There is always a way out. And so being present with that person and being able to be comfortable with their situation is probably the best gift that I can give as a helper, as a person who's close to someone, to say, I'm here for you. I don't know how to help you, but I want to learn how to help you. What do you need? Be present, call them, be aware of what's going on with them inside.
That's good. Thank you, Lisa.
So I mentioned at the beginning that I used to work in a prison. And one of my jobs there is if we had a prisoner who was feeling suicidal or who had attempted suicide, I would have to go and sit with them and essentially interview them. The reason the prison did this is because they are legally responsible for the welfare of the prisoner. And so it was something that we had to do because if somebody died in our custody, we were responsible for that. But as the person that would sit with this prisoner, that wasn't really my interest. My interest is that there was somebody right here in front of me who was going through something that was terrible and devastating for them, and that they no longer wanted to live, that life had become a torture for them. And so one of the things that I would always do is just start by honestly exploring with them what their issues were, what their problems were. And that's a lot of just being present, listening, accepting, not judging, and letting somebody unfold their story in their own time, in their own way, and not trying to take over the story, not trying to jump in and say, oh, well, that's easy. This is the solution to that. Toward the end of the interview, I would always try to gently explore the reasons why somebody might want to continue to live. And so you could help them to show, actually, there are people who love you. There are people who need you. There are things that you take joy in. There are things that you find meaningful. There are things that give you purpose. Because it's easy to forget those things when you're in that state of mind. And, you know, some of the, I worked in a women's prison, and one of the things that would regularly happen is that we had prisoners come in who are pregnant. And so they would carry the baby to term. They weren't allowed to have babies in the prison. So the babies would be taken off of them as soon as they'd given birth. And the babies would be sent away for adoption. We'd have the prisoner come back to the prison, and they would try to kill themselves because they just had their baby taken away from them. And they were really, really tough, because you'd say, what are your reasons for living? And they'd say, I have none. I've just lost it. It's just been taken away from me. And the only thing that I could do is to say, in about 16 years' time, that child is going to want to know who their biological mother was. And it's up to you what they find. They can find a gravestone. They can find some, scarred person still in a prison. Or they can find somebody who made a mistake, who turned their life around, and then lived a good life. And even though you're saying, wait 16 years for your reason to live, that never failed. That never failed to give somebody a change of perspective. So I think that's the answer, really, is, as you're saying, be present, listen, accept. Don't try and tell somebody what they should be feeling, but gently lead them maybe to explore the reasons they have for living.
I was going to give a summary of your answers, then you just did a great job, Pete. So no reason for me to do that. That's good. Thank you. I know we're over with time, so I'm going to go to the last question. I'm going to skip to the last question here because I think it's very important. And the last question is very practical. The question is, what are the different ways that people can find help for mental health through Christ Church?
Come. Be present. The more you're here, the more you are known by others, the more you get to know others and other stories, the better for your life. My life is such a rich life because of you guys, because I know you, and because I've had a wonderful privilege to get to know some of you more deeply, many of you well, and that's a wonderful thing. We have groups at Christ Church. I'm going to invite you to the groups right now. We have the marriage course starting in August. Excellent tools for you in your marriage. We want you to come. We have community Bible study just finished and starts back up again. We always want to be a community in Bible study because that's the way to get connected with God. That's the way to open ourselves to be able to hear from God personally in community, which is great. And we have emotionally healthy spirituality coming up in October. So all of these are opportunities for you. Every group we have at Christ Church has rules, guidelines we call them. Why? Because we as human beings have some bad habits in relating to each other. Like Pete says, we want to correct or fix or tell somebody what to do with their life. That is not the way any of our groups are meant to function. And the rules in the group or the guidelines in the group are to help us unlearn bad habits and learn good habits of relating, which we hope eventually will be a normal thing for all of us in all of our relationships in every context at Christ Church. So really, I would say that's the first most important thing.
As far as the sort of things that are available through the church to provide support and education and that kind of thing, that's down to you guys as the pastoral team. I can't speak to that, but I'm one of you guys. I'm one of the congregation, so I can speak to you about what we can do. And it's a lot of what we've already spoken about. It's about being welcoming and accepting. It can be about supporting. People, especially people who are in crisis, often have little gaps in their lives, and we can help them to fill those gaps. That might be, picking the kids up from school, or helping them to make sure that they get a decent meal, or just listening, or saying a prayer. There was something else I was going to say, and it's just gone from my mind. But
we can come back to you, Pete.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it comes to you, you can interject and and say. a couple of things that I wanted to add as well. When we talked about doing this series, we really tried to be mindful of what the needs might be, and we didn't want to just do 3 weeks of nice messages. We wanted to give Christ Church and beyond the opportunity for people to find all these things: hope, help, and healing. And so with that, people can come to anybody, from any leader, anybody from the pastoral team, and say, I would like to talk to somebody. And it might be with John, it might be with Lisa, it might be with me. We are happy to sit down and meet with people that just want to talk about what they're experiencing right now and help you find help. And sometimes we have our limits, and we want to recognize that. And so sometimes that means us helping you find the resources or getting connected with the right help or person. One thing that we did for today is we put together it's like an informational sheet. There's a stack of them by the Bibles and the interpretation equipment. And these sheets they have some reminders of how to find help when you might need help. And there's a list of numbers of resources here in Uruguay that you could call that can help you with certain issues. So take one of those if you'd like. Talk to somebody if you want. And we want to be a part of helping people find healing spiritually and also just with emotional and mental issues as well. Another thing I wanted to share is that we know that we didn't get to all the questions, and even things I'm thinking right now that I didn't share. I'd like to talk more about that. We're going to do once a month at Christ Church. We're going to do mental health workshops on different times during the week, and we have one scheduled. The first one is going to be June 9th, a Thursday at 7:30, and it will be in English and Spanish. And so any questions you might have in a smaller setting, Pete and I will be here for the first one, so Lisa and others and John will be traveling. But there's an opportunity to come and ask any question you might have, talk to us personally, because we think that God's doing a lot of things in people's lives, and there's some things that people want to talk about and some questions that they want to have answered. And after that, we're talking about other workshops, and we'll share that information later. But I think a lot of good things are going to come, a lot of good training and opportunities for people.
Can I just say one thing coming to mind? God doesn't heal what isn't real. So if I'm not real with what's going on inside, if I'm not comfortable talking about those things, or if I keep it to myself, then I can't find healing as well as if I take the risk or take the opportunity to speak to somebody about what's going on. It is okay. Whatever is going on inside you is okay, and God wants to heal it. But he won't heal it if we don't recognize it. He's not going to, that's not how God works.
That's great point.
And that's actually the thing I was going to say, more or less. I just wanted to encourage us to, in a sense, testify, share our stories, normalize people talking to each other about saying, I've had this experience, I felt awful, I struggled for a period, this horrible thing happened to me, whatever it might be. We can create a community where we normalize these issues by talking about them. And in so doing, we prepare ourselves as a community to welcome in people who have these sorts of problems and issues in their life or in their histories.
All right, thanks to you both. And thank you for being a part of this, being willing to be a part of this different type of message on a Sunday morning. I've enjoyed it, but I think there's also really hard things, too, that we've touched on. In closing, and first of all, thank you to everyone here that's present. Thank you for your patience. I know that we've gone over, but we think it's been worthwhile. We just want to close. I know we already took a moment of silence, but we're going to take a moment for just silent prayer, just a brief moment for us to just be silent, maybe close our eyes and just listen. to what God might be speaking to each one of us individually. The things that have been said, things in our own lives, maybe something going on in someone else's life. So let's just take a moment to do that.